I agreed with Keir's statement about the heaviest burden should fall upon those with the broadest shoulders. And that should be the basic principle of our taxation system throughout. Always has been in Labour Party history. That's why I think there is a need for a whole range of taxation measures. But the burden should fall on those that are the wealthiest, the richest, and the corporations make the most profits.
But all the kind of analysis of the of what happens when you raise taxes, particularly for the wealthy and for big businesses, is that it can change behaviour and then become a negative in terms of the money that's brought in.
Yeah, most of that research that Hammond and Osborne, all the others used to drag out in every debate, most of that has been disproved.
John, great to see you. You have been involved in preparations for government when you were Shadow Chancellor. Are you surprised by how seemingly unprepared Keir Starmer and his team have been?
It's always difficult when you're going into a new job, but there's been a number of issues that have come up that has surprised me, really. If you look at the tactics that have been used up until now, I don't think it's a strategy, actually. I think they are tactics. It's pretty normal when you take over in government, you blame your predecessor for the mess you're in. Okay. And George Osborne did exactly the same. In fact, when I was hearing some of the statements, I closed my eyes. It was like George Osborne speaking in 2010 all over again. But you have to be measured about that because you can go over the top. And if you do go over the top, you're talking yourself into a bit of a doom loop, as someone has described it. That's the first thing. And the second thing that surprised me is if you're preparing for a budget like this and you're taking such a long time, what you don't do is announce a couple of policies in advance that then set hairs running. So the policy around the two-child limit wasn't really a policy announcement, but it was reacted to in a way which sent a message that, oh my God, austerity is continuing and we're leaving children in poverty. And then I still cannot understand why the winter fuel announcement was made, particularly the way it was made without any sort of preparation of transitional arrangements or tapering, that sort of thing. So that sent a message out that we're in a hell of a state. Well, It is a toxic inheritance from the Tories, but the dogs in the street know that. We know that. And the second thing that sent the message out, well, actually, we might continue on with austerity. And that set an element of anxiety particularly in the Labour Party. And that's why we had such a downbeat conference, I think.
Yeah. So how are you feeling now with the budget coming up?
Worried. But I don't think people should be worried because it's got to be a big budget, but all the solutions are there. It's not rocket science what needs to happen. And we're seeing some of it revealed already. On the investment side, fully agree with the invest. We all do. But all we have to do is make sure we interpret the fiscal rule in a way that enables us to do that. And one of the things I did when I was a Shadow Chancellor in 2019, we changed the fiscal rule to what people are advocating now, which is net public sector worth, which would give you more flexibility on investment. They're moving towards that. I think they should just get on and do it. And then on the revenue side, it is tough what we're inheriting, but you can't in any way go into a budget where you give any hint austerity is going to continue. And you've got so many different opportunities. We have to have a fair taxation system, but you interviewed Dan Needle, didn't you? He put forward about 20 different proposals that they could be considering. And it's that Will Hutton thing that he always goes on about, on taxation, often you pluck the duck feather by feather. You don't kill the duck off, that sort of thing. So I think they've talked themselves into a bit of a problem, which is completely unnecessary because the solutions are there for a big budget and one that we need.
Did you have sympathy with them in the run-up to the election when they ruled out any increase in VAT, income tax, corporation tax? Because, of course, that's about 75% of, those taxes, represent about 75% of all tax revenues in the UK. So they have severely constrained how they can raise money. Do you think that simply to, in a sense, bank the election victory, that was the right decision?
When I was Shadow Chancellor, I introduced similar sort of rules, but on income tax, for example, it would only be the wealthiest, the highest earners that would increase taxation.
But they haven't said that. They've actually protected those at the top as well.
I think they took a step too far and therefore bound themselves in a bit too much. And on corporation tax, actually, I do think we do need to look at how corporations are taxed. I would have preferred more said about how we review tax reliefs to corporations at the moment. That might be something in the budget they're looking at.
I mean, I would just push back a bit on what you've said in the sense that if you look at the statistic that everybody wheels out on both sides of the spectrum, political spectrum, that the burden of tax, the share of national income taken by the government in tax is at levels we haven't seen since the war, right? If you then look at why that is, it is actually because companies and those on highest incomes are paying record sums. The marginal rate of tax for people on average incomes is at its lowest level since 75. So there is an argument for saying, if we want to have the public services that we believe we deserve, that everybody should pay a little bit more tax. Do you not think that's a credible argument?
I think there is a credible argument about how we have to convince people that actually taxation rates, if we want decent public services, taxation rates overall will have to go up over time. But when you're doing your first budget, you have to be careful about who you hit. And if you think that wages have virtually stagnated since 2008, and if you think people have gone through cuts on welfare benefits on a staggering scale, and we have we've got 14 million people in poverty, so therefore you can't put the burden on ordinary working people anymore. So what you've got to do is look at where you can, and where you can is on the wealthiest and the richest, and also on those that are making the most profits. And the levels of inequality in our society at the moment are grotesque. And the issue about inequality isn't just about income, it's about the quality of life for everyone.
But it is a chicken and egg. One of the reasons why living standards have stagnated is because austerity contributed to years of low investment, low growth, productivity not growing at the rate it would
low
have,
demand as well.
what it should have done. And some would say we were stuck in a doom loop. There is an argument that says not just that you borrow more to invest, but if everybody pays a bit more and much of that goes into productive investment, then you can, in that way, create a virtuous circle where the economy grows and everybody's better off.
That's why I agreed with Keir's statement about the heaviest burden should fall upon those with the broadest shoulders. And that should be the basic principle of our taxation system throughout. Always has been in Labour Party history. That's why I think there is a need for a whole range of taxation measures. But the burden should fall on those that are the wealthiest, the richest, and the corporations make the most profits.
But all the kind of analysis of of what happens when you raise taxes, particularly for the wealthy and for big businesses, is that it can change behaviour and then become a negative in terms of the money that's brought in.
Most of that research that Hammond and Osborne and all the others used to drag out in every debate, most of that has been disproved. In fact, usually it was around the timing by way the taxation levels increases was introduced.
But the IFS did some research on this, and they looked into the impact of increasing the higher rate threshold to 50%, and then found from that it actually does impact it negatively. So it's not just the Tories saying this; it was independent institutions as well.
With the greatest respect to the IFS, I have the problem with their credibility.
Right.
I can remember, I know they're seen as the ex-cathedra statements about anything on the economy, but I do have a recollection in 2008 that they were telling us that the banking crash would just last 6 months and we'd all be back to normal.
And they got that wrong.
So they did, and they do on other things as well. But nevertheless, you have to be careful. And that's why I think most economists at the moment, when they're advising the government on taxation measures, are saying, look at a whole panoply. You don't need to do necessarily big hits. You can take small amounts, but you need to make sure there's a concerted program and you explain it. But you explain the principles, and that principle that Keir's advocate, fully agree, heaviest burden on the broadest shoulders.
There are some taxes, though, that particularly if you happen to have mobile skills, you can avoid. You just go abroad. So you do have to be careful about how you impose taxes on your words, Keir Starmer's words, those with the broadest shoulders.
Yeah, there's a story that's going the rounds at the moment about, and I think the IFS have commented on it as well, which, we'll have these people leaving the country and all this. The interesting thing, it's anecdotal. When you look at the evidence, it doesn't stack up, but it's anecdotal. And yeah, of course, you just have to pitch it at the right level. But what you have to do is prepare the ground by having the debate. And we do need a debate about taxation. At the moment, I think it's about introducing a panoply of measures, a whole range of measures. But then after this budget, we do need to have a look again at some of the longer term issues particularly around how we tax land value in this country. And then secondly, wealth overall. And it's interesting. Rachel Reeves did a booklet 7 years ago, I think it was, Everyday Economics. It was great. I brought her in for a cup of tea. I said, this is fantastic. In fact, actually, it's most of the policies we're advocating. I didn't want to accuse her of plagiarism, of course, but I said to her, look, anything you want to lead on, let me know. But she's like, I'm busy on other stuff, fair enough. But she included in that booklet things like looking at wealth, but also looking at land value taxation.
So land tax, I mean, I actually heard her on Britain out in paperback.
£20 each that he has to give us every time he plugs his book.
Whenever I advertise my own book, I have to give Steph a couple
broad
of tenors.
shoulders and all that.
But anyway, I do advocate a land tax. It does seem to me to be disappointing that actually this is just not something that's debated properly. This doesn't have to be a left-right issue. Land is not properly taxed, and it's one of the few taxes that, you can't take land outside the country, so you can be guaranteed of the income.
I think I'm the president of the land value tax campaign or whatever it is. I haven't got the badge yet, but I think I am. But if you go back to all those, the debate around Henry George and his ideas and all this, that's a debate that's worth opening up again, because I think people do think there's an issue there that could be addressed fairly readily, but everyone's terrified of doing anything around council tax and things like that because of the experience of poll tax. But if you start the debate now, we can educate people into the implications of what land value tax
So
could
you
be.
think it's the scars of the poll tax that deter what you might call conventional politicians from talking about this?
And people, it brought a government down virtually, didn't it, in terms of Mrs. Thatcher's administration. But if you start the debate off, and exactly as you say, it's one of those elements that you can't avoid. And actually, I think could be readily collectible. But it's not the sort of thing you do in your first budget, but you lay the trail for future debates for a future budget. And I think you could build consensus around it.
Can I ask you just on borrowing to invest? And, we've argued on this program that she should be bolder in terms of borrowing for productive investment. One of the things that I'm literally staggered by, you say that you'd already recalibrated the fiscal rules in advance of the 2019,
with some
2017,
guardrails,
in advance of the 2017, 2019 general elections. We didn't have serious fiscal rules till Gordon Brown introduced them as Chancellor. But if I look at the amount of detailed preparation that he did in opposition, right? I mean, it's off the charts.
It was,
more than, for all that people respect Rachel Reeves, they just haven't done the preparatory work that Gordon Brown and Ed Balls did back in 96, 97. And in particular, the one thing that I am literally genuinely staggered by, is they are still nailing down their fiscal rules, which does seem extraordinary.
On the Gordon Brown experience, I fully agree with you. I was Chief Executive of Local Government Association then. And I can remember sitting in meeting after meeting after meeting in looking at different aspects of local government finance in particular at that point in time. And we were producing papers coming out of our ears. It was staggering, really, the preparation that went on. Didn't always listen to us, but actually had the debate. In this, I don't know how much preparation has gone on. Look, my position in the Labour Party is...
But they're still trying to work out how to calibrate the rule on how you borrow to invest.
I agree.
That's a fact.
I agree. My position in the Labour Party is, at best, I'm shouting through the letterbox, basically.
We'll come back to your position in the Labour Party. I think this is want to know where you are on all that.
From what I know, like you, I am a bit anxious about the lack of preparation, definitely. And also the fixation on the fiscal rule. Remember, Gordon Brown introduced one. Yep. Then George Osborne denigrated any concept of a fiscal rule, then introduced one himself. And then they went through, I think, 8 different fiscal rules at one point in time. So it can become a bit of a fetish. And you have to be careful about making sure you've got the flexibility within it to do what you want.
And also, just like from a lay perspective, no one cares about what the fiscal rules are, do they? Well, they just want to know, are things going to get better?
Well, the international markets do care about how you're behaving, whether you're setting rules and you're abiding by them. But you build the rule to give yourself the flexibility. And that's all I'm arguing for at the moment, particularly with regard to capital spend.
But can I just ask you, though, on the second rule, which nobody ever talks about, which is her second rule is different from Jeremy Hunt's. Her second rule is over a still as yet unspecified period, and she hasn't specified the period, day-to-day spending will be matched by taxation, i.e. she will not borrow to finance things like civil servants, public sector wages, welfare and all the rest of it. Is that, in your view, a sensible rule?
I didn't want to go into an election on the basis of having to borrow for day-to-day expenditure.
Right, so you agree with that rule?
But as long as you're willing on the income side to look at taxation effectively, you can manage that. That's no problem whatsoever.
But she's closed down her options when it comes to taxation.
I think that's why I think by ruling out such vast swathes of taxation as sacrosanct and not touching is a problem that we'll have to confront.
Can I just ask you? You said right at the beginning of all this about how now is not the time in this budget to put more tax on working people, but we know the inheritance is really bad. This is obviously the start of their term in government. So why not? Isn't this the time to literally get all the bad news out of the way?
Because, Steph, there's so many other ways that you can do it,
But this is the time now people will accept it, isn't it? It's like, oh, well, they can blame the Tories.
I don't think they will. It's been too tough on people. It really is. And when you're a constituency MP in a working class, multicultural community like mine, you're hard up against it. And you see how tough it is for people in work, not just those out of work or whatever. And people are really struggling. So sometimes you're tipping people over the edge. We've even seen that with the winter fuel allowance policy. So I think now's not the time to even consider that.
So can I just ask you, though, about one element of the sort of politics of all of this? She, Keir Starmer, both said no increase in the rates of income tax. Some of your colleagues have said to me, there is a sort of loophole here, and it's in that area of hypothecation. Horrible word. And what it means is she could invent a special new tax. She could call it the NHS tax. And she would say, right, we're going to levy 2p in the pound on everybody, and all the money goes to the NHS. I suppose a couple of questions. A, do you believe in hypothecated taxes like that? Do you think that there is a role for them? Many economists would say, actually, money doesn't know where it comes from. It's a complete fiction. It just goes into the general pot, even if you call it hypothecated, separated. But second of all, do you think British people would feel conned? Because many people would just say, well, it's a con. You said, no, it is basically an income tax. You've just given it a different name.
Yeah. Can you remember the Conservatives introduced on council tax, that special additional levy, which was meant to be for social care? People didn't see it going towards social care. People felt conned at that point in time as well. On hypothecation, as Shadow Chancellor, or if you're a Chancellor, the last thing you want is hypothecation because you want the flexibility. But if you're the Secretary of State for Health, you would want hypothecation because you want the guarantee of the income.
Yeah,
but I'm just saying, should Rachel Reeves look at this?
I think it's a mistake. I think at the moment you need to go out there with the broad arguments, give yourself the flexibility, both in terms of the range of taxation measures, but also how you invest.
But on a local level, though, I think, I come from the Northeast in Middlesbrough, high deprivation, rubbish infrastructure and all that jazz. If there was a tax, and you mentioned council tax and that add-on for social care, if there was an element of it you knew was going to transport and you saw genuine change in the transport in your area, a kind of localised hypothecated tax might have more impact.
I think that's a good argument. And then if you link in that to land value taxation, that sort of thing, you could have much more democratic decision making about what happens at the local level. But at the national level, you endanger yourself because you get trapped into having a lack of flexibility of how you need resources, because issues can change over time. We can have a crisis on one area where you need to get money into it, a policy area, very, very quickly, and you've tied yourself up.
So I've got to pin you down. You've said the broadest shoulders have to pay more. So what are we talking about? A new top rate of tax? Are you talking about putting it up to 50%? Are you talking about raising the rate of corporation tax? Or are you talking about reducing allowances for businesses? What rate of capital gains tax do you think we should have? Talk us through what you would do.
If you look at the panoply of taxation measures that people have been putting forward, the most obvious one is equalising capital gains tax with income tax. And we've argued that for a long period of time.
I mean, even though, for example, and you've said you're not a great respecter of the IFS, but the IFS does say that without reform of CGT, that would drive quite a lot of people to relocate, redomicile, and there would be less money.
You can link it with reform. Of course you can. But you need to level up because people see it grotesquely unfair, to be honest. Why when you go to work, you come in, you're on PAYE, you're paying at such a rate, and with capital gains, you're paying at so much lower. So there's a whole range of things like that. And there's, in terms of the whole range of measures that are out there, as I say, there's a small number of issues that you can address.
The top rate of tax, would you put it up?
As you address all of those, then you come to income tax itself. I would address the top rate as we did in the 2019 general election. You would put that up to the 50%, that sort of thing. And I'd look at the higher levels too. So I think that's worth floating at this point in time, definitely.
There'll be a lot of people listening to this and hearing you say that, which would lead panic in their heads. It might be entrepreneurs, people who are worried about capital gains tax. It's the thing that most business people are saying to me now when, I'm around at different events with entrepreneurs. They're like, oh my God, what's going to happen to capital gains tax? We're really worried about that. We've built our business from nothing and now we're going to get, this big taxation. And so what would you say to the people who are hearing this thinking, oh my God, you're going for the people who've created wealth? And that are the words we're hearing from Keir, is it's about wealth creation, it's about growth, but you're going to hit the people who are doing it.
It's the workers who create the wealth. So they go to work.
But the business people provide them with the jobs.
No. The business people come up with ideas, but it's the workers who create the wealth. And that's a partnership, of course it is. So therefore, in that partnership, let's all be treated equally. So therefore, if I create the wealth and I have an income come in on a wage basis and the others make their contribution and they, as a result of capital gains, we should all pay the same. It's just about making it fair.
But the argument from businesses is now, again, I was with quite a few last week who were, they're not big corporations. We're talking people who are running maybe a couple of shops or whatever. They're dealing with, the mental health crisis of some of their workers. They're dealing with all of the pressures they have in terms of their costs. Some of them aren't taking a salary because they're, making sure their workers get paid. And then the concern is, they're just going to be hit the hardest because the assumption is, oh, you're a business owner, you're wealthy.
No, it's just trying to say, but let's be fair. It's not about hitting any particular group. It's not discriminating against any group either. It's just making sure we have a fair taxation system where we all pay and pull our weight.
But what do you do in a UK where for, I think it's 24 of the last 30 years, the rate of investment in the UK, the overall share of the national income, which has gone to investment, has been the lowest of the G7 rich countries, which has been directly related to why we grow so slow, why productivity hasn't increased enough, and why living standards haven't increased enough. Now, some of that low investment is low government investment, but frankly, an enormous amount of it is low private sector investment. So how do you, if you're putting up taxes on businesses, how do you create the conditions for them to invest more?
Well, you know better than me because you've written about it. If you have an increasing level of public investment, that will attract private investment and you grow the economy overall. And again, it's not rocket science. It's just huge mistakes were made in the austerity period. And I think possibly one of the biggest mistakes was to cap investment. And so public investment always creates opportunities for private investment. And as a result of that, everyone benefits. And that was one of my biggest criticisms of the austerity years. And I thought, these are Tories. I thought they're supposed to come from a business background and know this. They didn't.
So this seems to me to be the nub of the issue now for Rachel Reeves. She's actually inherited a situation where public sector investment is declining in real terms, right? That is what she inherited from Jeremy Hunt. The amount that she now has to find to get that up is really quite considerable. It's many, many, many billions. Yeah. So your view would be the absolute number one priority for her ought to be to create the space for 20, 30 billion pounds, maybe more than that, of additional public sector investment every year.
You've got to, it's not the number one priority, but it is a priority.
Why is it not the number one priority?
Because we've got to tackle poverty.
But won't that be the route to tackling poverty?
It will help, but we've got some people living in such dire poverty. We've got 4 million children in poverty. We've got 1 million children classified as living in destitution. So that's a bit of a priority for most of us, I hope. But in terms of investment, it's that sort of scale of investment. But you've got to be realistic as well, because to invest on that level, you've got to have the capacity in the economy to do it. So I think what people are looking for is, what is your plan over the next 5 to 10 years, possibly, about how you gear up that level of investment. People know you can't do that overnight, but give yourself the capacity to do that, because I think people will be surprised at how quickly you can get that money out there and invest. Can I just give one example from yesterday? I had a discussion yesterday. This is how dire things are. There was a meeting yesterday with students, teachers, people involved in the education sector. And they said, look, we're looking for capital investment in education. 80% of our schools have still got asbestos in them. And we've had 300 teachers die of asbestos-related conditions since 2010.
Have we? I didn't know that.
Well, I was really shocked when I heard that figure. The NEU was talking about it. And they said, what we need to do is we need about 13 billion to retrofit our schools in particular to tackle the carbon issues that we have. And it would create 20,000 jobs. And I thought, my God, I didn't even know that. But that's the sort of scale of investment that's needed in just one sector. But you need to, and they were realistic about it. They say, we're looking at a 10-year program to do that. And I thought, this is a really good detailed plan, but actually desperately needed.
I'm really interested in you're talking about this idea that the number one priority is poverty, and particularly children. It's something Robert and I both, with the various charity stuff we do as well. Yeah. And and I meet those kids. I see those kids quite regularly. And how do you solve it? Because what is the answer to, because that is like my biggest beef in life. I think it's the thing that gets us out. It gets us productivity and growth if we invest and make sure our kids are all right.
Yeah. All budget discussions are about the sort of society you want to create and the measures that you take to create the society. I joined the Labour Party because the historic commitment of the Labour Party to tackle poverty, particularly to target those most vulnerable to poverty, elderly, children, disabled. I joined it because I wanted an economy where there's full employment and people had decent wages and they were guaranteed protections at work. And also they had a quality of life because we had decent public services, access to health, education and housing, basically. And that's the mission. And we talk about missions, that's the mission of the Labour Party. So in terms of one of the priorities has got to be tackling, for me at the moment, child poverty, because I see so much of my constituency. One simple measure was to scrap the 2-child limit. Predictions from all the different charities lifting 300,000 kids out of poverty. Resolution Foundation said 490,000. Just small measures like that, step by step, would assist. That's how I'm hoping now that in the budget that Rachel's going to come back with a proposal on that.
Do you think if she were to come back with a proposal to scrap or at least introduce more flexibility over time on the 2-child limit, that many people would say, well, in a sense, that is the quid pro quo for means testing the winter fuel allowance.
Two things there is on the 2-child limit, when that vote occurred on the King's speech, I was approached by the Chief Whip and said, look, we're doing this poverty commission. And I said, that's fantastic. And I'm happy with that. So just tell me this is going to be, the 2-child limit is going to be addressed in that poverty commission, definitely. And secondly, tell me the timescale on it. And I'll be happy to vote for whatever. But they couldn't come up with that. So they
didn't say the commission would look at that.
They said they'll look at poverty overall. Inevitably, it must be one of these issues we'll consider. So, well, tell me it's a priority. Tell me when you're going to look at it and tell me the timescale for the results of that. And I couldn't get that. And so that's why, because I opposed the 2-child limit when it was introduced by the Tories. I did a speech, said I'd swim through vomit to vote against it. And I almost did because of the hypocrisy in the chamber at the time. So I said, I'm sorry, that's not a good enough assurance for me. And therefore, I'm going to vote for the SNP amendment. And that's what lost me the whip, because this is such a priority. Now, I'm hoping...
How does it feel, just before we move on, how does it feel to be outside of the Parliamentary Labour Party for the first time in your parliamentary career?
It's a bit strange. The only sanction is that I can't attend the Parliamentary Labour Party meetings, which I wasn't a frequent attender of as well, I have to admit, but there you are. And I still abide by the whip. That's the requirement of it. And maybe I smile a bit more, but that's all. So, but I'm trying to...
Would you like to be back in?
Of course I would. I'm a Labour member. Of course I would. But I do the job just the same as I ever did. I've said to them, I'll always put my constituency first. And if issues come up, I'll always vote in their interest first. And that's it. But on this one, I think maybe they will do something more rapidly now, because there has been real anxiety. On the winter fuel allowance means testing, I believe in universal benefits, because you get the benefit to everyone then. But also, it's so much more expensive doing a means tested benefit. It's 12 times more expensive to administer, and that's so much less efficient. However, when that came up, I said then, well, if you're going to do that and you're worried about rich people getting this benefit, why don't you just include it in the pension and tax them? Simple as that. Or at least come up with a tapering, because in my constituency, I come in on the bus and I walk through town. I've been stopped in the street. I have a bit of banter on the bus, but people come up to me. I've had people come up to me. I've got Heathrow in my constituency. A lot of people work Heathrow, got a reasonable pension, but a lot of the women in particular only did a limited number of years, small pension, tips them over the edge, so they can't claim pension credit. So they're losing out. They will be cold this winter. And I'm worried for their health, to be honest. So it was a mistake. And if they'd have come up with proposals on tapering or whatever, maybe we could have voted for it. Age UK, I met them yesterday. They're saying this is pushing 2 million pensioners into fuel poverty. That can't be right for a Labour government.
Yeah. Do you wish you were Chancellor then?
Of course I do, yeah. That's why I stood as Shadow Chancellor. Yeah,
but are you literally sitting there now thinking you're getting this all wrong?
No. I'm trying to be as constructive as possible. As I said, I think there's a whole range of opportunities. This could be a big budget. But my worry is, why do you announce 2 measures which are effectively austerity measures when you're telling me you're going to end austerity? Because I tell you, my community can't take austerity anymore.
Can I just, this probably sounds a bit bonkers, but Steph and I both go out and talk to different groups of people quite a lot. And I do talk about child poverty and the scandal of child poverty, and indeed the scandal of a low-wage economy where you have what would traditionally be seen as full employment, but hundreds of thousands and some, actually more than that, people are in full-time work but depend on food banks.
And low pay, insecure work.
And so, it is, for me, one of the absolute scandals of any rich economy, forcing essentially people to live in that kind of poverty. One of the things that I'm always struck by is when I talk about these things, you sort of get a sense of people in the audience just switching off. And there is just something really odd. And I see this on a much bigger canvas, the way that people react to the even worse things that we see in places like Gaza. It's very hard, it seems to me, in politics or indeed in public life to get people at the moment to empathise with how other people's lives are so awful. How does one connect with people so that they say, well, this really is a priority to sort?
I don't say as much as that in my community.
Right.
When we have a problem, people queue up to help. I've been amazed at the altruism that there is out there. And I'm not being pious about this. I'm just saying that's not what I see. And I know where you're coming from. Sometimes things get to the point where people say, I can't cope with that. I've got enough on my own plate and switch off. But actually, I'm seeing less and less of that. I'm actually seeing people come forward.
Just on that, on the food bank point, because I was with the lady who runs the food bank near me, and she was telling me on Friday that the demand for the food bank now is up 60% and donations are down 85%.
Tough, isn't it, out there for people? The figure yesterday, Trussell Trust, when Labour was in power, the Trussell Trust gave out about 60,000 food parcels a year. Right? They now give out 3 million. That's how bad it's got. And the flow into food banks is drying up because people it's not that they don't want to give, they haven't got it to give. And that's how bad it's got. And it's 14 years of austerity. And I say to people, that's what do you expect? There's been 14 years of grinding austerity, low wages, people who are on benefits have been stigmatized as well.
Yeah.
We've had all of that. Now's the turn to turn all that round.
And is it going to get better?
I think it will, but it's going to ensure that Labour governments keep on track. It's going to require pressure from the grassroots, both in the party, the trade union movement, and our communities overall. And we have to be honest with people as well. We have to be straight that, like the vote on the 2-child limit and the winter fuel allowance, when you think something is not right, you've got to say so. And that's the only way we'll learn.
Do you think free school meals is something we should be doing? Because again, you sound really passionate about the kids. And obviously the breakfast in schools is a great initiative.
Yeah. Universal free school.
Yes, yeah. Because Sadiq Khan is introducing it in London. Yes. We're going in. To be honest, it's one of the most beneficial things that kids can have. You know you're going to get a decent meal. You know you're not going to be falling asleep in class because you're hungry, and that you'll get a better education as a result.
Everything you want to do sounds very expensive, though.
No, not at all. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, 6th largest economy. The wealth is there. Why? Because workers create it. So let's make sure it's properly distributed.
There is one other thing, though, slightly off piece that I wanted to ask you about. We've got what I think is probably one of possibly the most important political event of our lifetimes coming up, the American presidential election. Yeah. If Donald Trump wins, and I think there's a pretty good chance he's going to win. How do you think a British Labour Prime Minister, what kind of relationship do you think a British Labour Prime Minister should have with President Trump?
Trump election scares me stiff, to be honest. It really does, both in terms of the implications for our country and the globe overall. But an election takes place. If he wins, you have to deal with them like you do anybody else. But you have to count your fingers after every time you shake his hand.
Angela Merkel, when she was Chancellor, was very clearly, she very clearly distanced herself from Trump. She was pretty unusual as a world leader in the way that she distanced herself from Trump. Do you think a British Prime Minister could or should follow her example?
Yeah, but you have to have a business-like relationship. Of course you do. But at the same time, you have to challenge things when you think it's the wrong decisions being made, and you have to be honest. And your job is to represent the British people.
Even if the challenge then leads to negative implications for trade.
I think you have to look after the interests of the British people, and you have to do that from a principled position as well. Trump is threatening all sorts of tariffs at the moment. We'll see if that works out in reality. But if we have to have a fight on issues like that, well, we have to make sure that we're working with our European partners to have that fight.
Scary, this, talking of Trump. It is.
We just live in a time of really big change.
Well, and populist threat across. My big fear is that's what I keep saying, and I dropped Caroline ages ago about this. My big fear is always if we don't succeed as a Labour government, disillusionment sets in, and the beneficiaries of that will be the far right, as we've seen in Italy, France, and Germany.
And just on that, and you can decide, or you could tell us whether you regard reform as the far right. But if you were Keir Starmer and you were thinking about the threat 4 or 5 years' time, would you be seeing the threat as from the Tory party or from reform?
The threat's already there. Have you seen our council by-election results this last few weeks? We're dropping on average about 19 points. In Worthing, 29 points we dropped.
So this is the Labour share of the vote dropping really dramatically.
And we just lost a by-election council in Blackpool to Reform. So Reform is a real threat. And I actually think the Tory party need to wake up to that as well, because Reform could shift the whole tenure of our politics to places none of us want to go.
It's scary. Do you have anything happy to end on?
Yeah, I do actually.
Go on.
I do. And it is that thing out there, actually, that people are involved in the debate. They want a Labour government to succeed, and they're willing to pitch in with their ideas. So there's a momentum out there. It might not be visible to some of the Labour leadership at the moment, but there are people campaigning out there on all sorts of issues. Maybe not in traditional forms, but, people are taking action on everything that you can see. You see it about Gaza and other issues like that, of course you do. But there's so many other issues that people are campaigning on because they're not willing to put up with it anymore.
And so I've got to ask you the big political question of the moment before we go. Who gave you your suit?
me. Do you mind? Me. That's the other thing that really upset people in my constituency. Just at the time during the winter fuel allowance thing, all the stuff comes out about the freebies, the glasses, the suits, and all the rest of it. And I just keep, that's that phrase. Who used it? There's no such thing as a free lunch. There really isn't. My worry now is the next big scandal is around lobbying and lobbyists and people tracking those dinners, gifts to policy changes. And I'm saying to my colleagues that you have to be really careful on this because you could really disillusion people.
Yeah, an important message.
Important point. We'll have you back on to talk about that and other things as they unfold. But John McDonnell, excellent to see you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And that's it from us. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.